O Grupo Energy Telecom, através de suas 4 empresas, atua em todo o Brasil, integrando os principais serviços e soluções quando pensamos em tecnologia. Projetos de Public Cloud, comunicação unificada, Big Data, infraestrutura, Data Center, Client License, Cybersecurity e educação. Você pode contar com o Grupo Energy Telecom. Sempre a melhor solução.
Nós protegemos a tecnologia para você explorar novas realidades. Fazer o que quiser, quando quiser. Fazer amigos virtuais. Estar perto, mesmo estando longe. E conquistar novas fronteiras. Garantimos sua segurança digital para um futuro melhor. Kaspersky. Bring on the future.
Vale do Paraíba, uma região única com múltiplas vocações. A nossa é a tecnologia, é a inovação. Nós somos a NIP-BR. Trabalhamos para integrar, conectar, expandir, informar, entreter. A NIP-BR é solução corporativa, é internet, TV por assinatura, é telefonia digital. Os melhores serviços com o melhor custo-benefício. NIP-BR, sua melhor opção em internet, telefonia e TV por assinatura.
Você é daqueles que acham que ser moderno é ter um aplicativo para cuidar do seu dinheiro? É também. Agora, moderno mesmo é fazer parte de um grupo de pessoas que cooperam e crescem juntas.
Tem gente que acha que um bom atendimento é ter um gerente pronto para te ajudar. Nada mal, né? Mas pra gente ter voz e participar das decisões relacionadas ao nosso dinheiro.
Tem gente que acha que somos um banco. Somos muito mais. Somos feitos de valores.
Our infrastructure and natural resources can't keep up with growing demands. We need to be smarter. We need to care more. It's time to create smart infrastructure. We can because we connect energy systems, buildings, and industries to adapt and evolve the way we live and work for the good of the planet and the people. Creating environments that care. Smart infrastructure from Siemens.
A maior rede de pesquisas do mundo, com 5,5 bilhões de acessos por dia. Uma rede social avaliada em 70,7 milhões. Sabe qual a semelhança entre essas empresas? O investimento em softwares e algoritmos inteligentes. Tinova e SPS.
Na era da transformação digital, a Tria Software é o seu parceiro ideal. Trabalhamos com a aplicação de solução em software padronizada ou sob medida para melhorar o desempenho dos processos de sua empresa. Tria Software.
Bom dia, continuamos ao vivo com a nossa transmissão aqui do Parque Tecnológico de São José dos Campos, onde acontece a 7ª RM Vale TI e também o 4º Fórum da Indústria Espacial Brasileira. Pela manhã já tivemos 2 painéis como parte do nosso congresso, hoje totalmente voltado ao agronegócio, e agora abrimos a programação do Fórum Espacial. Lembrando que as palestras do Fórum são todas em inglês, então se você precisar da tradução simultânea, aqui em cima na plataforma você tem o ícone do globo, basta clicar e você recebe então a tradução simultânea da palestra que vamos ter agora. Vamos seguir então para o nosso primeiro painel e hoje o tema é o que esperar para o setor espacial. Vamos ver aqui se os nossos palestrantes já estão posicionados. Temos hoje palestrantes de diversas partes do mundo, dos Estados Unidos, África do Sul, Luxemburgo e o Paulo Vasconcelos, que será o nosso moderador da Agência Espacial Brasileira. Bom dia, Paulo. Um bom painel para vocês. A good job for you all.
Bom dia. Good morning. So thank you very much. Sorry about the delay. It's my pleasure here and honor to have Mr. Kevin O'Connell from U.S. Department of Commerce, Mr. Mark Serres from Luxembourg Space Agency, and Dr. Valandatam Musami from South African Space Agency. We're just waiting from Portugal to join us. Probably going to get them later, but it happens in space also. So we sometimes have some glitches in space in the same way we have in there. Space is a changing sector, so you can agree with me that we have a fast track on this one. We start to talk about returning to the moon or going forward to the moon. I was correct the other day on the live with Mike Gold from NASA. So told me it's not going back, we're going forward to the moon. So Brazil also was invited yesterday to join Artemis. So we probably, Mark, we're gonna get you there also and exchange some ideas. And it's a pleasure. Probably you're gonna see South Africa later on this initiative. So our goal is to join this project. And I think also we saw yesterday also congratulations to US about the landing on the asteroid and doing a perfect mission. It's a successful mission. So I congratulate US here in the name of Mr. O'Connell. So it's a dynamic, changing environment. You can see that we are moving in parts all around. The companies is getting faster and the sector is getting faster enough. So this is one of the challenges that we have here in Brazil also, because you know that Brazil is the 3rd aeronautical manufacturer, but in space we're still a little late on the process. So we need to get a little speed up. That's why we're doing this with this gentleman here, that they can tell us what the future holds and for space sector. So I'm gonna, without any further delay, pass the word to Dr. Musambi from South Africa Space Agent, so he can tell us his vision in perspective from South Africa, what the space sector holds for us in the future. Thank you very much. Dr. Musambi, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Paulo, and thanks for having me. I'm quite delighted to be here. I've got a presentation, so if you can just bring that up.
Ana, pode botar a apresentação dele, por favor?
Okay, no, thanks. So I wanted to make 3 very high-level observations and give you the perspective from the South African National Space Agency perspective, because I think that's important, especially from a developing country's perspective. Just to start off, the first observation, we've been hit by COVID-19. We've gone through a very deep sort of economic recession. But the surprising thing is that for the space sector, we've actually seen an upturn of investments. And I think that's primarily for 2 different reasons. One is that there's a increased appreciation of what space can do, even during the pandemic. And we've also seen even from a national perspective, there's been an increased demand for space products and services in general. And what this graph is showing area that used over the last 10 years, essentially. But in the last year, if we go back just 1 year, we've seen an increased investment in the space sector. And the sort of mustard or yellow-orange area is new investments that's come in. And essentially, we've seen over 10 times the investment in the space sector that we normally used to. And so that's very positive growth in terms of investments coming through to the space sector. And the primary reason for that is in terms of what government departments actually use geospatial information for. So we've got quite a large user base in South Africa, where government departments use geospatial information for what we call evidence-based policy making. And so we provide those products and services to those government departments. And so we've got 3 tiers of government. One is at the national level, and then we go to the provincial level. There's 9 provinces in South Africa. And here we talk about evidence-based decision making. So once the policies is passed, you have to make decisions in terms of how you're going to implement. And then you get down to the very local level where you use geospatial information for planning and monitoring, like town planning, where to put your clinics, agriculture, and so on. So there's a big demand on the primary segment, which is from government perspective, but we're seeing a demand on the secondary segment, which is from the industry side. So industry wants access to geospatial products and services because they use that for investment choices and analytics around business decisions. And so that's an area that we're tapping into at the moment. So this is giving impetus to growing investments in the space sector. So that's the first observation. The second observation that we've seen is that given that increased investment, there's also a greater industry involvement in the space value chain. And I think this is a global phenomenon. So if I just run through the value chain very quickly, you have a satellite segment, you bring back the data, you command the satellites from a ground infrastructure. And once the data comes through, it goes into your ICT pipeline, and then you develop the products and services that's required by the end users. So with this new investments that's sort of coming through, these are the kinds of how the investment in terms of how we're segmenting it across the value chain. So at least 75% goes on the satellite segment, 8% on the ground infrastructure, another 8% on the infrastructure for the data segment, and then 8% of that goes to the products and services. And we've earmarked 1% on human capital development. But what's interesting in this conversation, especially given the industry focus, if you look at the satellite segment and the development of the products and services, this is where we're actually using our industrial base. And so the focus is not developing these internally in the agency, but passing this to the industry. So we're contracting industry to actually design and build the satellites. And the same with the products and services. We are starting to contract the industry to build the products and services. So that's leading to the stimulation of the industry itself. And so where that takes us is upstream, we have satellite development, and that's where the industry are prime contracted to do that work. And then on the development of products and services on the downstream, we bring in the industry as well. And then as I indicated, there's an uptake by industry in terms of actually wanting access to the products and services. So given the growing industry focus from the South African perspective, we've established what is called a space industry forum called ZARSpace Inc., which is quite active. And in fact, we had a sort of a 4-hour brainstorming session this morning just to see how we could work together in terms of stimulating, supporting, and developing the industry. And what they informed me as well this morning is that they've been talking to the Brazilian embassy here in South Africa for an industry-to-industry engagement. And I'll come back to that point a little later on. The third observation that I'll make from a space agency's perspective is that we must revise our business model and redefine our roles and responsibilities. So here's the current structure for the space agency in South Africa. So we have an admin function, we have an Earth observation program, space operations, satellite engineering, and space science. And the point I wanted to make with this slide is that we are starting to redesign the agency to fit into the new role that we're embarking on. So this is the current structure. And in fact, where we're heading, sorry. Okay, it's not going back. There. So where we're heading is in terms of the bigger investment focus, the bigger focus on the industry, as I reflected in the first observation. We are now setting up a program management office. We have one executive responsible for the entire operations of the agency. And then we set up new functions for research, development, and innovation. And then there's a commercial arm because of the commercial aspects of the business that's coming through. And the industry focus sits between the research, development, and innovation and the commercial arm. So just to give you a perspective, because we're looking at research and development that then leads to industry or the technology platforms that can be used by the industry or commercialized by the industry. So we talk about research and development-led industrial development. Okay. So the R&D innovation aspect is where focus would remain, and then once it gets into the commercial domain, that's also where the industry is kind of centered as well. And just to give you a sense of what this means, and I talked about the roles and responsibilities, what you see on this slide on your left-hand side is a list of things that we have to deliver as an agency. And what you see is, if you look across in terms of the mapping, you will see there are several executives responsible for the same indicator or activity. And that's because of the construct of the business model. But in terms of the new business model that I just showed you, you will see that there is only a single executive responsible for any particular activity. And what this also does is that if you look vertically downwards, for example, you'll see an executive responsible for development and innovation. They can focus on the R&D internally, the research and development externally, the innovation aspects with regards to the industry, human capital development. So you can take a holistic view along specific strategic issues rather than the operational issues, which came through very strongly in the previous slide. So the observations that I want to take away from this, what I've just presented, we are moving from an operational focus to a strategic focus with the new business model. There is a move from being just a public sector institution to now being a business enterprise with the increased investments. And what we're also seeing is that we are eliminating duplication and starting to create efficiencies through the business model. And so the shift of the agency is where we're trying to implement everything in-house, but rather saying, let's get the ecosystem fired up to help us to implement. And so we're seeing greater industry support and involvement and co-creation of solutions by the industry. So the agency working with the industry forum and working with the industry itself. And then we also, as I said, we're seeing greater investments realizing through these co-investments. So with the initial investment coming through, we're continuously seeing interested parties wanting to co-invest. So you're seeing a multiplier effect, and by using the ecosystem, you're realizing economies of scale. So my last point that I wanted to make on this presentation is the international cooperation. It was actually the fourth observation that I picked up. So I've mentioned Zarspace Inc. working with the Brazilian embassy here in South Africa for an industry-to-industry collaboration. And we've seen the international cooperation increasing significantly. And I should also mention that there is an MOU that's been drafted between SANZA and AEB, the Brazilian Space Agency, that we're waiting to sign off on. And so that's also an indication of international cooperation. And given the focus on exploration, we're also working with the NASA for looking at the fourth deep space network. In fact, we have a new site that's earmarked for that. So in the next month or two, we'll probably hear from the NASA colleagues as to whether this is going ahead in South Africa in terms of the fourth deep space network. And so we're quite excited when we think there's a positive move or green perspective for the hosting in terms of the technical impact assessment that has been done. So Paulo, that's my presentation, and thanks for your attention. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Musami. We need to make that agreement be signed as soon as possible. And also, I think you're going to be here in Brazil as soon as COVID allows us to engage. We have some a national drink that you like here. We need to present you to you. So I'm going to, without any other topic, so I'm probably going to forward to Mr. Serres from Luxembourg Space Agency. And I just want to put you not in a soft spot, but I'd like to, if you, in your comments, would also address what you think about 21, 22 as a challenge for the space sector. Thank you, Mark. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, Paulo, thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure, of course, to have been invited to participate to the discussion. And I hope that I will be able to participate in further editions also in person. I think what just has been presented goes in the same direction than what I wanted to address here. And in fact, I want to address it from two different terms. The first one is a shorter term aspect. And I would go a little bit even beyond what the observations mentioned here. We are living a period of strong commercialization of space. And I think we're coming from historically a sector that has been driven strongly by institutions, governments, agencies. And I would say in the 80s, a first segment of these activities became commercial with the satellite communications. And now we are living even more commercialization. And this is a trend that we can observe since a few years now, and that we in Luxembourg, of course, are encouraging very much. I think this is definitely something that we have in our objective here, is to develop a commercial space ecosystem out of Luxembourg that enables all these entrepreneurs who want to develop business activities in this domain to be able to do it. And from that perspective, I think it's extremely important that we look at space differently from what we have done in the past. So it's not enough anymore to contract or to give contracts through agencies to the companies. We also have to provide means to facilitate investment in this domain. And indeed, we have observed, and I fully agree with what has been presented before, we observe already a larger appetite in investing in space, but it's still not enough. We have worked a lot over the last years to create awareness within the investment community. And I can tell you today still the perception of a lot of investors is that space is far away, it's dangerous, it's astronauts, it's risky, it's expensive. And I can make a long list of all these difficult terms that are discouraging in a certain sense some investors. But now I think we have to bring it to the forefront that there are also companies that are targeting very practical markets. And I think also, again, showing what space has been able also to provide here in support during the crisis is an excellent example where we find applications that are directly serving needs of potential customers. So the other element, I think that where I can certainly support what has been said before is the question of the role of the agencies. I believe here in Luxembourg, we have the name of Luxembourg Space Agency, but we are definitely not a traditional agency. We are not defining our own missions and contracting industry. What we do is listen to the entrepreneurs that want to develop their business and let them convince us that we help them develop this business. And it's extremely important here that this is driven by a market, by customers, users who are needing space-based solutions for their jobs, their operations. And so we have set up also the agency a little bit in the sense as Mr. Munzami just presented. We are really turning a service agency to support commercial entities to develop their activities. So, and that's also a question of philosophy. Traditionally, the agencies are the customers for the companies, but I think this is something where at least a part of the agencies have to review the way they act, and if they still remain a customer, I think that an approach that is going towards more service-driven contracts is certainly something that could be considered in the future. So the second aspect that I wanted here to address about the future of space or the space sector is something that is a little bit longer term. You certainly know that Luxembourg is active in promoting the use of space resources, and I think this is a theme that is extremely important. It's not easy. I think we have identified a number of challenges that we still have to address. It goes from, of course, technical aspects. We don't have all the technologies at the level of maturity needed really to go for operational activities in space resources. We certainly need to continue discussing about the legal framework that turns around space resources. The aspect of the financing is important. This will require a large effort in financing early activities, also from the public sector, but our ambition is here as well to involve as soon as possible the private sector in these developments. And last but not least, again, in the same spirit that we pursue here in Luxembourg, it's a question of market. This is still something that does not really exist, and so it's difficult also to attract investors when, let's say, the value chain does not exist yet. So, considering these challenges, we are trying to address all these aspects, and the very latest initiative that we have taken is to create a dedicated research center in Luxembourg. It's called European Space Resources Innovation Center, with the ambition also to give a platform to all the researchers that are involved in these topics to work together within the center or together with the center from their location. Of course, a lot of options of cooperation are possible here. And then maybe I come to the point you mentioned already, Paolo. I think we see an enormous opportunity now with the Artemis program that is led by the United States. And of course, we are extremely proud now being in this first group of countries who have already signed the Artemis Accords. We see here really an opportunity to bring all the topic on space resources forward, because it will be opportunities to make first experiments, technological developments, and then in further phases also to think about operational aspects. I know, and I'm always pushing in all the fora where I'm going and defending space resources utilization. I think we and more generally here, I talk about the agencies that perform exploration activities. They have to think now about the systems, the future systems, integrating space resources from the beginning. So it's not easy, requires still a lot of work and investment, but we are convinced here in Luxembourg that this will definitely change the behavior of all the activities and humankind in space, and will not only facilitate activities in space, but also create new economic opportunities for the future. So we see that as a future for the space sector. Again, it's not something that will happen now in the few next years. I think we talk about a few decades, but I believe that this is where it goes in the future.
Okay. Mark, thank you very much. I hope the translation of your words in Portuguese came out exactly as perfect English, because my audience should hear what you're saying about. Yesterday we had Hannah Flesch about commerce, space commerce, no, or space economic activities. And I hope they understood what you said, because it's very important, and that's what we're trying to make a mix. Not our administrative and rules here does not allow us to go like Dr. Mustami described in Sansa, but probably we can get a little closer to what you do in Luxembourg. I hope we can match a little bit, because we are just behind you in the Artemis. We're gonna get there. Don't worry. And about space commerce, yeah, I would like to forward the word to Mr. Kevin O'Connell, that is the head of the space in U.S. Department of Commerce. So what's your perspective in terms of the challenge in 21-22, just in the beginning of this discussion? We have a little more some time. Unfortunately, we're not going to have Mr. Ricardo Conde from Portugal. So please, Mr. O'Connell, it's with you, the floor.
Paolo, thanks very much, and it's an honor to be here for the 4th Industry Space Association. From the Commerce Department perspective, and I'm mindful that I'm the only person on this panel that's not from a space agency, so we'll talk about it as much from the enabling conditions here on Earth as we will from the things that go on in space. The discussions between government and industry in this area are so vitally important to understand what's coming in the market, about the effects of regulation, about the important decisions related to investment and talent that have already been called out by my colleagues on the panel. I'll just mention again, I'm Kevin O'Connell. I'm the Director of the Office of Space Commerce at the U.S. Commerce Department, and we're responsible for advocating on behalf of commercial space activities, but we're also responsible for leveraging the entire Commerce Department on behalf of the commercial space industry. And there too, I'll call out my sister agency within the Commerce Department, the International Trade Administration, for their partnership with Brazil and Brazilian Space Agency so far that's gone on since March of last year, and the webinars and the strong interest of U.S. industry in participating in activities in Brazil. We can talk more about that a little bit later. What are we seeing in the space sector? And it's already been touched upon. I'll come at it from the commerce perspective. What we're really seeing, the transformation that we're seeing in space, is really related to the application of commercial efficiencies and commercial practices to a traditional space acquisition model. And that's really what is driving this. That's resulting in easier access to space. It's resulting in lower costs, especially, and that's very, very important. It's also important to note that we're also seeing the contribution not just of focused investment in space, but we're also seeing the impact of transformations in other technology areas, communications, cloud computing, a whole host of other technologies that are increasingly being incorporated into the business, even developments in manufacturing, for example. And so we need to pay attention to those sort of adjacent industries. And so really, the future of the space industry and the space sector, Paolo, to your specific question, we think is very, very bright. And for the reasons cited already, I'll mention, number one, we have an inspiring mission for both, our generation and the generations that are behind us, the youth in our countries. I'll talk about talent at the end here in a minute. We also have not just government visions, like we have with the Artemis Accords, for example, like the things we see in our National Space Council activities and space policy directives, but we also have industry vision. We have industry folks that are imagining things that could be done in space very, very differently or in a brand new way, and I'll mention that in a minute. We have a permissive regulatory environment. That's very, very important to look at how laws and regulations are either encouraging or impeding the growth of space activities, whether they be for exploration or space commerce. Mark mentioned the role of private investment. We have an increasingly sophisticated and growing private investment sector, as well as an insurance sector in the United States. And I think what's different today about that is that the investment community is much more savvy about the space business than they were 10 or 15 years ago. They're much more sophisticated on what makes a space company run successfully. And that helps shift risk for entrepreneurs that actually have an interesting idea. Last but not least, you need a strong and diverse entrepreneurship community. Again, we're fortunate to have a tremendously large and diverse one in the United States, considering new ideas all of the time. And that innovation comes from both companies large and small, by the way. It's not confined to one particular group. On the downside, we have to deal with the space debris issue, and I know you may want to talk about that in a little bit. Space is increasingly congested, and there's both more debris up there than ever, and that's bound to become a more complex problem. We have a big role here at the Commerce Department in that, partly because of the impact, potentially, of commercial contributions to helping mitigate that problem. But it's also a problem where we can't today have to solve in a very, very short period of time, in the next few years. Some of this activity we're seeing even at the state level in the United States. The non-traditional space states in the United States are now taking an active interest in the space economy. And so, one of the questions that I guess get asked all the time is, what's the area we see the best area to invest? Is it upstream in the space business? Is it towards space? Is it downstream towards space? And we can cluster the activities we're seeing in space into three broad categories. One is a group that I'll just call the disruptors. Companies that see the existing commercial models for space activities, remote sensing, communications, even weather to some extent, and think they can do it differently or better or cheaper or with different enhanced outcomes, if you will. So that's one community of people that we see. The second is the group of inventors, the people that are going to create wholly new capabilities for space, heavily focused on the space exploration missions, and very important. And the last, and this is a much more recent one, it's as I like to joke, it's the community for which you never have to leave Earth to make a contribution in space. It's a growing segment of companies that are focused on what I'll call the space infrastructure. And that includes everything from companies that are interested in deep space communications to a whole group of companies that is interested in training, feeding, housing, equipping the next generation of either space tourists or those good folks that will represent the permanent presence, the sustainable presence, if you will, that we're going to have on the moon. So that space infrastructure piece is something we have seen growing very, very quickly at this point. Paolo, let me spend the last couple of minutes of my remarks on talent, because talent here is very, very important. All of our agencies know that we need to groom the next technical cadre that is going to enable us to get to space and do very exciting things in space. And we often see people come here at the Department of Commerce that want to focus on an engineering school or a group of technical experts that they have. One of the things that we like to remind them is that you should draw the circle a lot larger. That in fact, as we're headed toward the $1 trillion space economy, we're going to need a very, very wide range of talent that is going to help us get there. So we'll definitely need the core technical talent, the engineers, the scientists, others that are going to enable this mission. But we're also going to be able to benefit from, or we need to benefit from, say it a better way, we're going to need to benefit from artists and business people and economists and lawyers and a whole host of other skills that we don't typically focus on in the space business. We're starting to see communities focused on the unique contributions they can make based on their core competencies that are not the technical competencies, but that still have a vision of unique and interesting things that they'll be able to do in space. Those are the people, in addition to the technically qualified folks, that are going to fuel the $1 trillion space economy. So on that note, I'll stop and happy to take questions, obviously, with my colleagues.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kevin. Again, I think also the translation from your remarks are people understood, because we're trying to open the circle also to incorporate other professions and skills, and also people need to understand that. There's always it's something that we're trying to achieve here in Brazil. We still a little more focusing the technical, but we are trying to open this,
sure,
as you mentioned, because it's clearly the way ahead of us. I don't have any doubts on this perspective. But I would like to explore a little bit with Dr. Musami. And we're talking about space exploration. What's the next step, Dr. Musami, in the SANSA perspective? You said one already in your briefing, so you're looking for deep space, but what do you think as a broad view?
Yeah. So we've got from a space operations 60 years of the mission, we did a lot of support for the pre-missions from South Africa. We had, there were 3 sites. It was Goldstone, Wimmera in Australia, and South Africa, in terms of ground segment. So we've got that experience, and this is why we're having this conversation around the Deep Space Network for the Lunar and the Mars missions going forward. The other aspect that is sort of big focus that's coming through. In fact, the design for a new space weather center was released yesterday for the agency. So we're putting up a new 24/7 operational facility. So you'll know that the International Civil Aviation Organization has passed regulations that space weather needs to be part of the flight plans of all civil aircraft. And that's because of the effects of space weather on navigation, on communications, and the increased radiation effects. And in fact, between Southern Africa and South America, there's the South Atlantic anomaly. If you're flying in that space, increased radiation. So aviation safety becomes quite critical. And Kevin mentioned space debris. In fact, we're working with the US on a 1-meter class telescope for the asteroid Grand Challenge. And then also space debris tracking centers here in South Africa. So, and then there's also some thinking around science missions that we're looking at going forward to complement what we're doing on the space weather side, but also some opportunities on the lunar missions as well. In fact, we've already got some payloads on some of the lunar missions already, camera systems and so on, that's been manufactured here in South Africa. So we're going to see a lot more of that starting to happen as well, given the increased focus on the Artemis program and so on. So we're looking at those opportunities as we're going forward. Thanks, Paolo.
No, thank you very much. It was very interesting, and we're going to do partnering on this one. Don't worry about that. And I have one question for Mr. Service from the audience also. They understand how can we do a better work in terms of private public sectors investment in the space, and how does it works in Luxembourg, the balance between public and private?
Well, the balance, it depends where you can have, I would say, a market. And what we encourage essentially is to develop commercial activities that are somehow independent on the big institutional market. And this becomes a real commercial approach. As long as the companies still depend on also public procurements, I mean, it's a pseudo-commercial, and you can see, in fact, the model that we refer generally to is the one of the satellite communication market. I think, of course, you still have institutional users, but there is a big chunk of the market that is a real commercial market where you have also the private sector as a customer. So in that sense, I would say our approach is a bit unbalanced because we are mainly focusing on this type of activities. We don't see ourselves as Luxembourg Space Agency being really a customer for industry. Yeah, we are rather a supporter, and what we try to do is really facilitate the development of their activities. And now, from the perspective of the investment, what we have done in Luxembourg is stimulate the creation of a new investment fund so that companies can have access also to equity funding. And we are permanently looking into other funds, not necessarily even based in Luxembourg, with whom we can work, because the development of the whole chain in the development of these commercial actors needs investment at different stages. So here in Luxembourg, we have somehow a tool now to support very early stage investments, but once the companies are growing, you need investments at different scaling moments and also different levels of investments. And I think here, certainly in the US, this community has somehow grown already and become more sophisticated, which is not necessarily the case everywhere. And I think there is still work to be done here in Luxembourg, here in Europe, to further this. Having said that, we have already on board also very big players in terms of investment. So, for example, we have worked a lot with the European Investment Bank as well, which is an organization that is also very interested now to look into how, on the European level, they can help in supporting the development of space companies.
All right. No, thank you very much, Mark. It's a challenge for all of us, that this balance. That's what we're trying to achieve in Brazil, to take a little bit the weight of the government and try to foster the private. But there is some transition that we should foster in the process. That's our challenge today in the country, to make it happen. The budget is not that good as I wish, but we're pushing them. I hope this yesterday announcement, we can put some good words in our budget agency to foster some money on us. But I would like to talk to Kevin, because you have a background on NOAA, and recently U.S. Congress attributes to Department of Commerce to manage the orbits. So it's an interesting arrangement. So you have NOAA, FCC, and now Commerce, the Office of Space Commerce, to work together. It's my understanding. How can you manage that? How are you going to manage that, Kevin?
So where you started with, Paulo, is our Space Traffic Management Directive, Space Policy Directive 3, was created by the administration a little over 2 years ago. And it directed as part of a whole of government activities. So that's central to how we're approaching this. NASA, DOD, FCC, I should say FCC is an independent regulatory agency in the United States, obviously. But there's a whole of government effort to start. An important part of that was giving to the Commerce Department responsibility as a civil agency for space traffic management. And the way we have approached this, Administrator Bridenstine likes to talk about space debris by talking about 4 measures that you can take to avoid creating new debris or dealing with the space debris problem. The first is to avoid creation of it from the get-go. And so some of our efforts are focused there. The second piece, and this is very much the biggest piece of where our attention is right now, is improving space situational awareness. Improving our understanding of the space environment, taking over from our Department of Defense, which has done this for decades on behalf of the Space Safety Mission, creating a civil agency parallel that can actually bring together data from the Department of Defense, what their public catalog is today, other data sets that we have inside the Department of Commerce, but also increasingly commercial data sets, as well as those of our international partners, including their commercial sectors. So part of this is a very large organizational effort. You may have seen recently that a study that was requested by the Congress, the National Academy of Public Administration, looked at the organizational and budget aspects of doing this mission, and they came right back to the Office of Space Commerce as the best place that's best suited to do this in the federal government, because of our collaborative approach that we have been talking about, including all of those people. Leveraging the commercial sector means that we think we can move a lot faster. Again, a lot of the capabilities are already in the market, whether they be new kinds of sensors, cloud computing, data management, a whole host of things, data security and integrity. So it's a longer conversation perhaps than we have right here. It's a very large collaborative effort. We think this is a critically important mission. Again, as I said earlier, this problem is bad today. We know that space debris threatens the astronauts aboard the International Space Station. The astronauts had to move a couple of weeks ago because of concern about a piece of space debris headed toward the space station till it could maneuver. It threatens the billions of dollars of satellites and other space activities that every one of our countries has in orbit. You know, even a small micrometeorite can destroy a key piece of $1 billion satellite. And it also threatens the growth of space commerce. And so for all of those reasons, we really have to deal with this on a pretty urgent basis. Our technical approach is going to be to create an architecture, a cloud-based platform called the Open Architecture Data Repository, where we'll be able to bring all of these different data feeds in And we're already in active conversation with both commercial industry and our international partners to see what pieces, what kinds of data, what other kinds of capabilities they might be able to bring to bear. Last point on this is it's not only space capabilities. Again, there will be areas like artificial intelligence, data integrity. What we have to create is a trust-based system where operators are actually trusting the data that they have about where they are relative to others. To be complete, let me finish the other two approaches. The next piece is space traffic management. And we see that largely as improving our understanding of the space environment so that space operators have a very, very good sense of where they are, both in general, but also relative to others, and can make better decisions about how, if and how they have to move, if and how they have to maneuver, things like that. The final one is obviously there's a lot of consideration right now of active debris removal. That's the fourth to be complete amongst the four. Very, very important problem. And this is, among all of the good things we've talked about, this is something that we have to worry about that could really impede our progress as we go forward. So a lot more to say on that, but I'll stop there.
No, thank you very much. We have some time, but not much. I would like to make a question same question to all of you, and I'm going to start with Dr. Musami regarding the education part. So Kevin mentioned that we need to enlarge the circle to put other professions or skills on the space sector. How do you think that you can do, how is done in South Africa, or what's the future perspectives to done this kind of fostering education in the various levels in order to support space activities in the future?
Thanks, Paulo, for that. I think this is a very important aspect in terms of growing your own timber for the future needs of the space industry. So what we've done for the last decade from a South African perspective, we're not a big country. So we've got a bursary scholarship program where we support about 50 or so master's and PhD students that want to study in the space domain. And that's on an annual basis that we provide this kind of support. We also have what we call an internship program. So we take about 20 to 30 students on an annual basis into the agency so that they can gain experience or professional development program. And then we also try to reach around 25 to 30,000 students, young students every year. And so I think in our initial conversation just before we got on, we have these mobile laboratories. So there's a little vehicles where you put or kept a number of experiments on board. And we have this problem in South Africa in the very deep and rural schools where they don't have facilities. So these mobile labs go in there and they spend a few days conducting experiments so students can understand exactly the material they're trying to learn. So that's another intervention. And these are the kinds of things that we're starting to increase with the increased investment that's coming through. So we're going to see a much more concerted effort to grow and focus on a number of more students coming through the pipeline than what we currently used to in the last decade. Thanks, Father.
Thank you, Dr. Musami. Mr. Serres, what's your perspective on this one? I know that Luxembourg has a lot of initiatives eventually.
Yeah, well, in fact, I think this, as the others, this is an extremely important element, especially here. Once we have as an objective to develop our economy and have more companies, etc., all these entities need a skilled workforce. And unfortunately, and I think we are not the only country having this problem, we see that there is a lack of technical profiles, and we need to encourage the young generation really to go into more technical careers. I think that's a huge problem that we are facing. So what we are trying to do now is really go into the very lowest level in primary and secondary school, where the idea is to teach the teachers to use space as a pedagogic tool. It means it's not now really teaching about space, but it's using a space phenomenon, I don't know, in a physics course or in a mathematical course, or they have developed kits when they talk about materials, and so using space brings enthusiasm and, I would say, inspire the young generation. And this is what we do there. We hope, of course, that the impact will be that these youngsters will then follow into technical careers and, I don't know, study engineering, taking engineering studies or more scientific studies. So then the next level that we have as well is now a master at the university, which goes a little bit in the direction that Kevin mentioned. We need somehow to expand a little bit the capabilities. And here we are giving a complementary formation to people who have a technical background, and so that they are aware about the legal aspects related to space, the whole business aspects, also including investments aspects, so that at the end, these people are much more operational within an industrial landscape and also capable to create their own company. And then we have also, that's in cooperation with ESA, where we provide the possibility to young graduates to go and work for 1 to 2 years within the European Space Agency, which is a fantastic experience that, well, we cannot offer that. We are not a technical agency, so this is the type of experience that unfortunately youngsters cannot really gain coming to the Luxembourg Space Agency. But we also have a small group regularly of interns that come and support us. And then I would say it's not finished in terms of chain really to develop talents. We also now work on the research aspects. And so here I would say we are active on all the aspects from primary level up to the research level where PhDs and postdocs can also be supported in this domain.
It's a challenging topic. Once you put the topic on the table, Kevin, what do you think that Commerce is going to engage with NASA and some other agencies to tackle this education issue?
So actually, Administrator Bridenstine and I testified, I think, about 1.5 years ago, and this question came up from one of our senators, actually. And obviously, all of the things mentioned so far, the government education programs are very, very important. The movement in the educational systems, et cetera, but also don't underestimate the role of the private sector in playing a role here. The Secretary and I have just come back from an inauguration of a headquarters from a company that will have the first commercial lander on the moon. And as they designed their new headquarters, they designed it in such a way so that children could actually come from the local area. This is Astrobotic Technologies out in Pittsburgh. They designed it so that children could come and actually see the manufacturing of the lander right there in the room. And so the kids are looking at things that are actually going to the moon. Really, really very cool the way that's designed. The other thing I'd say, and Mark hit on this in his remarks, we also have to do a better job explaining the impact of space to everyone. It is very rare that people understand how many times a day that they actually leverage space. And again, Mark hit on it in the COVID context. I mean, during the pandemic, space investments made in the past have played such an important role for everything from these kinds of calls that we're on right now, to children and their education, to telemedicine, to making sure that goods and services move very efficiently to precise locations. Folks generally don't understand how much they leverage space in a given day. And I think the extent to which we improve the general awareness of how much we're relying on space, that's going to help the cause quite a bit.
Yeah, that's what we saw today. We didn't was able to get Portugal online. So we suffered a little bit of that. But okay, it happens. I just wanted to emphasize to all of you that I would like to appreciate that we have that you using your time to join us here. It's a pleasure to have all of you. an honor also, because all of you are higher level in your countries, and I really appreciate this perspective that we are having here and talk to the audience in Brazil to fostering this capacity, because we're pushing that very much in the country to move away from the past perspectives and have the new ones coming on. And I really appreciate all of your insights. This is very a good interaction. I hope we can engage with all of you from the next years and extracting the best of us in the new space era. I can say that for Brazil, at least, we're going to kick off with this new possibility of joining Artemis. Dr. Mustama, thank you very much. Mr. Serri, thank you very much. And Mr. Connell, thank you very much. I just wanted to make a marketing. I can do that also. I'm controlling the time. We're just putting out the industry catalog in Brazil. So it's the spatial industry catalog. It was done with all the industries. And I thank you very much, all of you, for seeing this today. And I hope you could continue engaging in our forum. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Bom dia a todos.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you to the excellent panel. Bye-bye. A nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bom, e a programação do fórum continua agora à tarde. Nosso próximo painel será às 2 horas com o tema mineração espacial. E a programação do RRMTI Vale também retorna às 13h15. Espero por você um ótimo almoço e até já.
O Grupo Energy Telecom, através de suas 4 empresas, atua em todo o Brasil, integrando os principais serviços e soluções quando pensamos em tecnologia. Projetos de Public Cloud, comunicação unificada, Big Data, infraestrutura, Data Center, Client License, Cybersecurity e educação. Você pode contar com o Grupo Energy Telecom. Sempre a melhor solução.
Nós protegemos a tecnologia para você explorar novas realidades. Fazer o que quiser, quando quiser. Fazer amigos virtuais. Estar perto, mesmo estando longe. E conquistar novas fronteiras. Garantimos sua segurança digital para um futuro melhor. Kaspersky. Bring on the future.
Vale do Paraíba, uma região única com múltiplas vocações. A nossa é a tecnologia, é a inovação. Nós somos a NIP-BR. Trabalhamos para integrar, conectar, expandir, informar, entreter. A NIP-BR é solução corporativa, é internet, TV por assinatura, é telefonia digital. Os melhores serviços com o melhor custo-benefício. NIP-BR, sua melhor opção em internet, telefonia e TV por assinatura.
Você é daqueles que acham que ser moderno é ter um aplicativo para cuidar do seu dinheiro? É também. Agora, moderno mesmo é fazer parte de um grupo de pessoas que cooperam e crescem juntas.
Tem gente que acha que um bom atendimento é ter um gerente pronto para te ajudar. Nada mal, né? Mas pra gente ter voz e participar das decisões relacionadas ao nosso dinheiro.
Tem gente que acha que somos um banco. Somos muito mais. Somos feitos de valores.
Our infrastructure and natural resources can't keep up with growing demands. We need to be smarter. We need to care more. It's time to create smart infrastructure. We can because we connect energy systems, buildings, and industries to adapt and evolve the way we live and work for the good of the planet and the people. Creating environments that care. Smart infrastructure from Siemens.
A maior rede de pesquisas do mundo, com 5,5 bilhões de acessos por dia. Uma rede social avaliada em 70,7 milhões. Sabe qual a semelhança entre essas empresas? O investimento em softwares e algoritmos inteligentes. Tinova e SPS.
Na era da transformação digital, a Tria Software é o seu parceiro ideal. Trabalhamos com a aplicação de solução em software padronizada ou sob medida para melhorar o desempenho dos processos de sua empresa. Tria Software.